Yes, hello. It's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultra Culture Podcast. Today, we are rejoined for his second appearance, the multi-talented Alan Green, a British-born pianist, composer, author, educator, and scholar of the Shakespeare Authorship mystery. Alan served as the musical director for Davy Jones of the Monkees and co-authored 2 best-selling books with him. In 2004, Alan was introduced to the Shakespeare Authorship mystery, a historical question surrounding the identity of the author behind the works attributed to William Shakespeare. This sparked a new passion in Alan, leading him to create a variety of original works on the subject. And he is also the host of a brand new captivating show on Gaia that summarizes all of his work on the Shakespeare mystery called Shakespeare Decoded, which explores the mathematical codes and alchemical clues hidden within the works of Shakespeare. This series reveals Shakespeare's connections with Freemasonry, Rosicrucians, and royal families, and takes viewers on a journey into a hidden world of espionage and esoterica. Alan was also my next-door neighbor in Los Angeles for many years, and we were both working on material related to Dr. John Dee without realizing it. It was hilarious when we discovered that. So before we dive into our discussion with Alan, let's talk about an exciting opportunity for those of you interested in tarot. The Magick of Tarot is the brand new comprehensive course offered by magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. Guided by legendary author Lon Milo Duquette, this course will help you master the Thoth Tarot, venture into the world of Kabbalah, and learn about the spirits within the cards, including a guided meditation journey through all 22 major tarot trumps. But you've heard me talking about this course already, so enough from me. Reviews are starting to come back from students, and here's what a few that have already completed the course have had to say about it. James M. shared, "Wow, I've always loved Jason's work with magick.me. This course was perfect for not only being introduced to tarot, but showing the Kabbalistic correspondences that are already a part of us. I will forever use the material as reference for not only tarot, but all esoteric exploration. Many thanks to Jason and Lon for this truly wonderful opportunity." Thank you, James. And musician Aaron M. also chimed in. "This class is like a really great record, newly released by a classic artist, but produced by a modern contemporary who is also a master in the same genre. Like when Jack White recorded Wanda Jackson, and the result was pure magic." Thank you, Aaron, for that very, very kind review. So why wait? Embark on your journey today with the Magick of Tarot. You can see it at tarot.magick.me. That's tarot.magick.me. tarot.magick.me. All right, I will see you in class. And now let's welcome our esteemed guest, Alan Green. Welcome back to the podcast, Alan. It's been a long time, and I'm excited to talk to you. We haven't talked in a long time, unfortunately, but here we are. You're now a rock star. You have a new Gaia series that you've launched, so maybe and now you have long hair and look like Kenny Loggins, which is hilarious, and looks very good.
Oh yeah, there's that. Yeah.
So,
and I'm going to start singing country music. So there you go.
Oh, well, perfect. You'll have to visit in Austin then, since I live here now, and it's known for the country music. So, why don't we just start off for people who didn't listen to the earlier episode, which everyone can go back and listen to it, but maybe just talk a little bit about yourself, the focus of your work, and about the new show.
Sure. I can't even remember what we talked about in the first time I was on your show, but I guess it was just a lot of background. Most interesting part was the fact that we lived about 5 or 6 feet from each other.
Yes.
Years ago, and so that was a cool thing. Because if 2 people are writing books about John Dee on the planet, and they're both literally in the same apartment building,
and don't realize it.
Kind of weird, isn't it?
It's a little odd. It's a little odd.
It was really, really interesting. Very, very funny. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, go back, check the other podcast that I did with Jason. My name's Alan Green. I have a website that is tobeornottobe.org, which is really the place for getting all the information about what I'm doing. I've been obsessed with pursuing the Shakespeare authorship mystery for now 19 years. And all of that time, I was sort of doing it really just as a passion project. And obviously, I would have liked to think that it was going to find its audience eventually. But, after a while, maybe around about the 12-year mark, I started thinking, well, it doesn't matter. It's just I'm going so deep into it and into all these codes that it will find its audience eventually. And I began to not care and really do it just for the pure reason of wanting to get that truth documented so that the world would know. But it seems that the gods have shone on this project, and finally it's finding an audience, which is very gratifying. So I have a Gaia series now on Gaia TV called Shakespeare Decoded. And if you go to my website, tobeornottobe.org, which is, by the way, words. I always stress, it's not letters like a Prince song. It's words the way he would have wrote it. tobeornottobe.org. The first thing you'll see is a button there to go to see the Gaia show. And if you click on that, there's a 7-day free trial. And so you can go and binge them all and then get off Gaia if you wanted to. But
you can also watch the shows they have with me on it when you're on it.
I was just going to say that, Jason. I wasn't going to let that go by.
Okay, all right.
Or you could stay on.
It's all the more reason.
And see all the more reason you can stay on and see your favorite host, Jason Louv, Ultra Culture, and check out his appearances on Gaia.
Lots of good stuff on Gaia.
But a lot of other good stuff on there, a lot of really, really interesting stuff that is probably attuned to your audience too.
Definitely.
So if you go on there and click on that, please see that. And that's how you can just get an overview of not at all what I've done in 19 years, obviously, because it was overwhelming for the producers of Gaia to come to me and say, we'd like you to synopsize your 19 years' work into 7 half-hour episodes.
Yeah.
And after I got off the floor and said, no, that's not even possible. It's not. But it's important, of course, to try to synopsize into one particular focus so that people get it. And to me, the most important thing to try to convey was, and still is, no matter how much we all may believe, we understand that Shakespeare is very important. I mean, obviously we know that. We don't need to be taught that. But really, 99.99% of people are not terribly interested in Shakespeare.
Well, now Shakespeare is also getting canceled out of literature departments. So they're erasing him from the curriculum.
Just shocking, isn't it? So now the timing is good because I mean, literally, that's the first uphill climb that I have always considered it's my job to try to get past is, oh, yeah, I know it's great. I know he's supposedly the greatest writer ever. I might go see one play in my lifetime. Maybe I'll see Midsummer Night's Dream or whatever, But in terms of the general audience, now he has millions and millions of fans, obviously. There are millions of people who adore Shakespeare and would go to the ends of the earth to find out more about him. But I'm talking about real viral, what we're trying to do with whatever we're trying to get out these days with our passion projects. We want it to reach millions and millions of people online. That's an uphill climb. So the very first thing I say in episode 1 is literally I come out through a red curtain, walk to the camera with a mask over my face, and I start with to be or not to be. That is what you're expecting, right? Well, we'll have none of that here. And I throw the mask away and I say, there'll be no me thinketh, no wherefore art thou, and definitely no men in tights. This is about the real Shakespeare, and it's a shock, man, because I always equate it to that moment of going from black and white in Wizard of Oz to suddenly widescreen Technicolor. You're going to know about a side of Shakespeare that no one has really, truly ever suspected. It's a mind-boggling joyride, really, of discovery after discovery after discovery. And that he was working with this much maligned and misunderstood character that Jason knows an awful lot about because of his wonderful work with the amazing Dr. John Dee. And the funny thing is, when we were literally living 5 or 6 feet across the corridor from each other, we were both writing books, but from different perspectives. And he didn't know the side that I was writing from, and I only tangentially knew the side that he was writing from. I knew, obviously, about all of the Holy Table, the Enochian tables, and the angel communications. But I hadn't delved deeply into that, other than to find out that the angels had delivered to a reformed table, an alternate version, which is the only one you can get down to the root of solving the Shakespeare mystery. It's a code to help you solve the Shakespeare mystery. So that's it. It's codes. It's like a modern day Da Vinci Code, except it's absolutely real.
Mm-hmm.
It's not made up Dan Brown codes, which are all clever, etc. But this is a story of something that was really, truly, truly happening, and it had a reason for the cover up, many reasons for the cover up, and it's everything. I mean, it is joyful. There's a lot of humor in the codes, absolutely mind-boggling. But there's a royal scandal, of course, behind the whole thing as well.
Yeah.
So
I think that in our first episode, we talked about the Shakespeare codes. We talked about Dee. We talked about the mathematical constants in the Great Pyramid, and you wove it all together. I'm curious, have you tried using AI on any of these codes?
No.
That might be interesting. I've thought about doing that with the Enochian stuff, but I haven't got to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just tuned into an AI show the other day by my dear friend Craig Marshall, who used to be Brother Mitrananda in Self-Realization Fellowship. He was a monk in Yogananda's order of monastics for 35 years, and then he left the order and is now a really go-getting sort of empowerment master, business entrepreneur, and he's very interested and involved in AI. And when I began to hear him talk about it on this show just about a week ago, I thought about that. I thought, wow, I wonder if I could ask AI because I'm always going into it never ends. First of all, there are always more and more and more and more and more and more codes. And why would that be? It would be because they clearly wanted this to get out and find its way into the future at a time when it would be safe for the information to come out. And if there were only a few, that would diminish the possibility of them being found. And since there are many, 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 they all support and corroborate each other, and then they increase the validity because after a while, it's easy to downplay. And of course, the powers that be, the Stratfordians particularly, there was the people who believed the man was the man born Shakespeare in Stratford, and the person we were always told in school is the true author, you use the word true author, was the author. They don't want the truth to come out that it's someone else, and so the idea that
I think
without so many codes, then that becomes impossible to refute. It's like, well, 2 or 3, Alan, you're making it up. If there's 100, it becomes clear. Yeah,
I think we talked on the first show, and I'll stop referring to it because this is the show now. But you had said something. You had said something to the effect that if the real identity of Shakespeare, which you had worked out from the codes, was known, that would be a huge blow to the Shakespeare tourism industry and so forth. Or the Shakespeare industry, however people are making money from it.
On one level, that would be the first assumption, and that is the assumption that the Stratfordians make. That's why they are so virulently against anybody coming up with codes. I mean, I'm not by any means the first person to suggest that. Right? There were 150 years ago, the Baconians were very, very, very avidly saying there are codes. Then there was the Oxfordians, there've been the Moravians and the Derbyites. And it's gone on and on for such a long time because it's clear. Most people that look at it with a rational viewpoint say that this cannot be the untrained, uneducated, untraveled grain dealer from Stratford who just has miraculous access to all of this amazing knowledge, let alone the codes. He seems to know everything about everything. So it's not a new thing to try to look for code, but I have done one thing that no one else has done, and that's my way of getting in and saying, look at this, because finally there is actual physical evidence. And that one thing that I did, and again, I won't harp on it because I think we covered it in the first episode. However, just to catch you up to speed, the codes, once they are thoroughly understood, are very, very clear. They're simply saying, I've put the answer inside the Holy of Holies altar stone in the Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-on-Avon, where the fake Shakespeare is buried. So there's his gravestone there, and there's his monument on the wall, and about 10 feet behind there's the Holy of Holies altar stone, and the codes say it's in there. And so I had to go on a long journey to try to, how am I going to get into that altar stone and find out what's there? It's a 3-ton marble piece of rock, 9 foot by 3 feet by a couple of feet deep, held in place as the altar stone. It's got 24-hour CCTV cameras, and it's got a forensic system that sprays you with a chemical if you get too near. So, and it's one of the most popular tourist attractions in England. So how am I going to get there?
You managed to, though.
I managed to by literally ingratiating myself into the people at Stratford. I did 6 trips there over 4 years. I helped them a lot in terms of trying to help them raise money for various things that they needed, celestial windows, various things that they needed help with. And so gradually they got to trust me and like me. And then I was able to photograph and then film. And then eventually I was allowed to do a show, an actual presentation of my musical in the chancel with a congregation there. And it was that allowed me to then put up a banner advertising the musical in front of the altar so that it hid the altar from view. And at the end of the concert, I said, let's turn all the lights off and do this last number by candlelight. We did it by candlelight. That defeated the CCTV cameras. The forensic system was already defeated because I placed the piano right next to the gravestone and they couldn't risk staining their Steinway. And so everything was all set, and I had a team behind there, radar scanning it and filming it in night vision. And the result is on my website. You can just go to the website and see it, or go to Gaia and see it in more detail, because I've got an actual replica of the altar there on Gaia. But the bottom line is, instead of having a tiny hole in it that all consecrated altar stones have to have, which is like about the size of a child's shoebox, it's 250 times that size. There's a hole, huge, huge, huge. And you can see within it different densities of things that are inside that hole. So we have proof, and that's the one thing that at least makes this theory stand out above all others, is that there is physical proof. So the game is to try to get the church to open that altar.
Did they, when they found out that you had scanned it like that, were they upset?
Well, they haven't even contacted me. I mean, I don't know when they would have found out, because of course I did not tell them. I had to do it covertly. And then I did a second trip there once I had got the results of the scan, I went there a second time and did a talk in the church to an invited audience, and with the vicar there, the Reverend Gorick. And I was actually telling them that the codes say there's something in this Holy of Holies altar stone. Wouldn't that be wonderful for you? You could, I mean, my goodness, shall we scan it? I'd already done it, knowing that they wouldn't give me permission, but I'm asking them now, shall we scan it? Because if you scan this, I think you'll find that there's something there. And then, you know what you can do with that? You can open it up and take it out. And, you know, the trap is that they believe there's no possibility that it could ever be anybody else but their man. Right? Mm-hmm. If you ask them, is there any possibility that it could be Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, or Francis Bacon, or Marlowe, or the Queen, or, you know, the group theories, any of that? They answer quite directly, absolutely not. No chance at all of there being anybody. I mean, I'm not putting on a funny voice here. This is Stanley Wells. I've got him on video telling me that. There is no chance. So in that case, then there's no chance. So let's go and open it, because this would, in effect, end that gloomy, dark cloud that has hung over your story for the last almost 200 years. You could finally kiss goodbye to that and say, look, we've proven that there's something in here, and obviously it must prove your guy. Yeah, but we're not going to do that. And by refusing to do it, therein you understand that they do have this secret fear that, better not do that just in case. So they do doubt that their man is the real man, but I had to sort of trap them into that. And so consequently, when I offered it to them, they refused vehemently. And I took it all the way to the highest possible authority, because the vicar punted and said, well, I can't give you permission to scan the altar. I said, I will do it. I'll pay for it. I'll do the whole thing. I'll do it with you. We'll film it. Oh, no, we can't do that. Asked the congregation. The congregation said, literally one of the members in the congregation said, you know, all kinds of people come here and tell us that they found a solution, you know, but, you know, it sort of spoils the mystery, doesn't it? We don't really want to know a solution, because that somehow takes away the faith.
Oh, no.
I said, yes, I understand it would, yeah. So, you know, they don't want it to happen. So I went to the Archbishop of Coventry. Sorry, the Bishop of Coventry. He's not the Archbishop. He has now become the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was the Bishop of Coventry, and I took it to him. And I gave him a long presentation. I said, imagine, you know, you can take this out of the altar, you can slap it on a wall, you can build a museum right next to your church. I mean, I've been helping you raise money for the Celestary windows. You needed £60,000, right? We raised money for that. We did this, we did that. You're always going cap in hand looking for money. What could you charge for this thing, whatever it is? If you find one page of Hamlet, the background to this is, for those who don't know, there is nothing. Shakespeare left 0 paper trail. There are no manuscripts.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So
until now?
Until this very moment.
Well, okay, all right. Well, it's one of the things okay. There's a lot to grok, I understand. So anyway, it's right in the Gaia show. At first I said, this is, you know, do you realize that here are the things that we have been taught, and we were never told the following. So since you didn't know it, Jason, and your people, your audience don't know it, I'll just give you the elevator pitch on that. Not a manuscript has ever been found of anything in his original hand. When they did the author does the manuscript, and then a copyist does what's called foul papers, and those are given out to the actors, and then they do the play. And even the actors themselves don't have a whole script; they have their lines, and they all stand in a circle, and then somebody directs it, presumably the author, right? And they're called foul papers. So the foul papers exist, and that's how we know what the plays are, obviously, and then they get printed ultimately. But the original work, not a manuscript has ever been found of a play, a poem, a sonnet, anything. Not a letter. The greatest writer in the history of literature never wrote a letter to anyone. And he's the most sought after individual besides Jesus Christ. I mean, there has been an army of people trying to find anything, scouring libraries, attics, basements, museum shelves, all everywhere to find something. In 400 years, nothing has ever been found.
Wow.
There's no pages, not a page, not a line, not a word in his own hand. All we have are 6 shaky signatures, all spelled differently, all look like they were written by somebody who has the palsy, who cannot write, and even handwriting experts cannot agree they were all written by the same person. So that's all we have. Add to that, tell me if you've ever heard this. I mean, this is not my findings. This is Mark Twain. Mark Twain wrote a book called Is Shakespeare Dead?, in which he very, very beautifully summed it all up. He said, no one ever saw him. He has the most successful 25-year career in London, in the playhouses and in the publishing houses, and it would be like him being a cross between J.K. Rowling, Spielberg, and Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
right, all rolled into one, and no one ever saw him. No one ever, no contemporary ever said, "I bumped into Bill last night at the Mermaid, and he was writing out a draft of Macbeth." No one.
It's interesting to contrast that with John Dee also, who everyone saw and left behind huge amounts of written documentation, like just gigantic amount, even though some of it was burned and lost. There's still so much in his own handwriting.
So those things are what turned me onto this in the first place. I mean, in other words, okay, there are no manuscripts. That's just seems impossible. How can they all disappear? There are no records of him ever doing any work or getting paid for doing any work like others were in the Henslow diaries of Marlowe and Kidd and Johnson and Lilly. And they're all, I got £2 for doing such and such. There's no record. Plus, he was never seen. Plus, as far as we know, he had no education, the man from Stratford, and plus he had never ever traveled anywhere. So how does he know? Half the plays are written in Italy. He knows the geography and the idiomatic language and the customs like the back of his hand. It's just not possible that it's the man that it's been pinned on. So why was that done? And that's what got me interested in it in the first place. So because of all that, you've got Stratford really, really don't, if, as I said to the bishop, I said, look, there's nothing in contrast to all the other great writers or musicians or philosophers. Really, there's something. This man has nothing. In fact, all the other writers of the time, 25 or so, it's been documented that there's paper trails for everybody. You can trace them. Oh, yeah,
wasn't there? There's also I think there's a story about Christopher Marlowe getting stabbed in the eye in a bar or something like that. So he was out and about in society and left behind stories of what he was up to. And that would have been Shakespeare's clearest contemporary.
It would have been his clearest contemporary. And that indeed, let's stick a pin in that for a moment and come back to that. Otherwise, we'll get off on another trail. But that's a very, very interesting aspect of it. Yes, the fact that he was murdered, supposedly stabbed in the eye in it's called a room in Deptford. But so the point is this, though, to contrast what would something be worth? In other words, this is the great Shakespeare. We have nothing. If you found literally one page that was provably in his hand, They do a lot of juggling of things about hand D in some other work that is supposedly his, but they have nothing to judge it against, and so it's all speculation on part of the Stratfordians. But the point is, if they had something, it would be priceless, and they could slap it up on a museum wall, charge whatever they wanted. Mm-hmm. The world flocked.
Yeah, it would be like going to see the Mona Lisa.
It would.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because let's take that as an example. Da Vinci painted roughly 18 or 19 paintings that we know of. So there's no scarcity of his paintings and his other drawings and works, etc., right? So a few years ago, what happened? A new painting came to light, Salvator Mundi.
Yeah, I put it in the John Dee book.
It's a wonderful story because it was bought in a garage maybe 80 years ago. Someone saw it somewhere and bought it for £10, £12 or something. And then the interest grew that maybe it was a bit more valuable and somebody bought it off of him for about $100,000. And eventually it got into the hands of the conservators who really knew what they were dealing with. And it was well, to a large degree, it was examined deeply for a few years and repainted where the paint was missing, etc., etc., and restored is the word I'm searching for. It sold at auction at Christie's 4 years ago. $450 million.
Yeah.
And one painting that is not a rarity in terms of the corpus of Da Vinci. One painting, 450. So if you found Hamlet, if you found any of the plays, if you found the sonnets, when nothing is in existence, God forbid they would even think of selling it because that painting was bought by MSB, right? Mohammed bin Salman, the guy who brutally ordered the murder of Khashoggi. So the Saudis have it. But 450 plus 50 to Christie, so it literally sold for $500 million. So in other words, your financial worries would be over. And even with
$500 million is a good day's pay by anyone's conception.
So why won't you open the altar? Oh, and here's what the bishop said to me after I'd given him this whole presentation and shown him how much money they could make. Just money, like just the money part of it. And there's no doubt it's him. We're not going to come up with anything else. Could it be anybody else? No, it can't be anybody else. But we're not going to do it. Oh, okay. Why? And he said I would have to take it to a higher authority. Well, there are only two higher authorities at the time. One was the Queen, and the other was God. And neither got back to him, apparently. So... And I never heard anything. So your question initially that bred all that was, are they upset with you now that they know you scanned it? Because obviously they know now because it's on my website and it's on the Gaia show, et cetera, et cetera. And of course I haven't heard anything. And it's not likely I will. Why would I? Because as far as they're concerned, they don't have to do a thing to keep the status quo. They just keep the money rolling in. They have a couple of million visitors a year who come to Stratford. They sell mugs, and they come to the church and they pay £4 to come in and see Shakespeare's grave. The vicar said to me, he said, I'm embarrassed at the fact that we even have to charge money. He said, it's disgusting. But we charge money for them to go and see the grave because it's inside the actual chancel. Well, in all of that time, nothing's going to shift until there is tremendous pressure on the church to open it. And the only way that pressure is going to come about is when this story becomes viral. And so I have a link in my website where you can vote. It's just called Vote Here. Vote your conscience. Do you want the altar to be opened? And it says, yes, I want to find out what Shakespeare left for us. Or B, no, let's not open it. Let's leave it another 400 years. In other words, those are the two choices. And of course, 15,000 people or so have voted yes. And about 1% of those have said no, which is fairly typical. But that's not going to shift the barometer because that's nothing compared to virality these days. We need millions. But as we all know, as the story progresses and it takes hold, it's not hard to get 1 million. And then once you have 1 million, it's not hard to have 500 million. It's just the nature of the exponential mathematics of it. And so that has been my thrust so far. And so obviously, hopefully the Gaia show brings much more attention to that. And once we have, several 100 million people voting to open the altar, then Oprah will be there with a mic in their face saying, do you know that 500 million people worldwide want to open your altar? What are you going to do about it? And by then it will be too late for them to do anything about it. In other words, they can't really go behind the scenes and open the altar themselves and take whatever's there just in case it's somebody else, in which case they would hide it. Or if it was their man, they'd say, oh, here we've got the proof. It's not going to happen because the altar is heavily concreted into the floor and the back wall, and they'd have to invent something. They'd have to, say, oh, there's a gas leak. We have to close the church for a couple of weeks.
Well, this would make a great heist movie. And that makes me think also, you mentioned you've been on some new adventures, which I really want to hear about. You mentioned you went to Egypt in 2021, and that I have not. I don't think you've caught me up on that. So I'm curious what that adventure was.
Yes. So I went on I've done 4 trips to Egypt. And the reason I do those trips to Egypt is because, again, I told you at the beginning, astounding though it is, when this Shakespeare story goes into Technicolor, it's like, what? He's left, John Dee left codes on the cover of the sonnets. You can see a video on my YouTube channel about that. Just look up sonnets. And all you do is connect the dots of the punctuation on the cover of the Shakespeare sonnets, and and they connect into 6 perfect right-angle triangles with a circle going through all the outer points. It's absolute perfection. Why would that be hidden on the cover of a book of poetry? You can't see it. You have to understand that, I think I'll just connect these punctuation marks, and suddenly it's there. And the reason is each of the triangles, when you calculate the ratios, they all have a common hypotenuse, but when you calculate the ratios of the 2 sides, they are each a mathematical constant, such as pi or phi, the golden ratio, which were known then, but there are also 5 of them which were not even known then, such as Euler's number and the Euler-Mascheroni constant and Fibonacci constant, just things that they should have no idea about, and yet they're there. And then beyond that, there are 2 lines that are pointing precisely to the geographic coordinates of the Great Pyramid. So he's telling us to look at the Great Pyramid. And so I started doing trips to Egypt to see why is he pointing us to the Great Pyramid. And when you examine in detail the mathematical structure of the Great Pyramid, again, you find, and this is not known in Egyptology either. It's just, I did it simply because here's Shakespeare saying, there are 12 mathematical constants on the cover of the sonnets, and the identical same 12 mathematical constants are in the basic structure of the Great Pyramid. If you investigate now online and ask are there constants in the Great Pyramid, you'll get, maybe pi and maybe the golden ratio. That's about it. But it's not that. I just went deeper and found that it's, without cherry picking, you just connect the coordinates of their angles of the side slope and the corner slope and the base, etc. You find all these constants. And so Shakespeare was telling us, John Dee specifically, the mathematical genius behind this side of things, who was funneling it to the real Shakespeare, was telling us there is tremendous, powerful, ancient wisdom hidden in the Great Pyramid. Go look, go seek, go find, check it out. And so I've done 4 trips there. And in that time, I was able to corroborate a lot of the mathematics, which was very, very helpful. Not to mention, it's a wonderful place to visit. But this 4th trip that I did, I was approached by a woman for part of the trip. We were on a ship, a cruise ship going down the Nile, and this woman approached me and said, I love your work, etc., and liked the shows that all the presentations you've given. I really want to help you get this story out. What are you doing besides the John Dee information and the Egyptology? And I hear you've written a musical, because I'd said that during one of the shows. So here's the deal. I've been a musician all my life. And so when I first stumbled on this Shakespeare work, my first thought was to write it as a musical. I didn't think I was going to be finding codes or studying the history at all. But I got into it first for 2 years, and I wrote a musical thinking, it'd be a great subject matter, the mystery of why is there no paper trail for Shakespeare. So I started writing it that way. But then as I found real codes, I found that was pulling me stronger, and that was more important. I put the musical on the back burner, went into the codes. So there I was, like at this point, 17 and a half years later. And she says, come to Santa Fe I have a production company, and I'd really like to help you in getting the story out in any way, shape, or form you want. And I had said, well, I'd love to get the musical on. So she works with her production company is with a man named David Seidler. David Seidler won an Oscar for writing the screenplay of The King's Speech, a wonderful movie about King George VI stuttering, having to overcome his stutter just at the time that he became king, when he didn't want to be king because his brother had abdicated and all of that, right? The history of the English monarchy there. And he has to give a speech because England is about to enter World War II. So it's a marvelous movie, and he won the Oscar for it. And he is her partner. And so I went to Stratford. I went to Santa Fe, and we started working on the screenplay for a movie of my musical. And so that was the initial impetus for me going there, was that doors were opening. And at the same time, I got given the Gaia show. So it's been a very, very busy year and a half, obviously, and wonderful. But we're in the middle of writing. Well, we were until the writer's strike just happened.
It's still going, right?
Huh?
It's still going, isn't it? It's a long strike. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, a movie is going to take a long time. That's something that usually takes about 4 or 5 years to pull off from scratch, right? But it's a movie of the musical that I've already written. And so I'm obviously recalibrating the musical to a certain extent because I wrote it, 19 and 18 and 17 years ago. And now I know the full story so much bigger. So I'm going to be changing certain parts of it, rewriting. But yeah, so that's on the table. And at the same time, the Gaia show was taking place, and Santa Fe was nearer to Gaia for me. Gaia is at Boulder, Colorado, so it was just a drive up. So it was a really fortuitous meeting where all the stars were aligning, and so fingers crossed on that.
So what were your thoughts on Egypt and from the details of the pyramid to just the experience of the whole thing? I mean, if you've been back 4 times, you must like it.
Oh, it's magical in so many ways, but the key attraction for me is, of course, the fact that there is an ancient knowledge that we are unaware of. We tend to teach and believe evolution is linear, and we've gone from apes to cavemen to smart us with our iPads and iPhones, right? And we know, Jason, through the Vedic knowledge and scriptures that you have studied under the same teacher that I follow, Yogananda, that evolution is cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes through what are called yuga cycles. The Greeks called them the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. And the Vedas call it, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, which we're in now, and Kali Yuga. So in Kali Yuga, or the Dark Ages, we're at the lowest end of the cycle. So the cycle goes through, it's called precession of the equinox, 24,000-year cycle, during which time, at the height of the Golden Age, or Satya Yuga, it is said that we walk the planet like gods. We are in touch with our full mental and spiritual capacities, but we gradually lose that as we descend into the darker ages, and we start losing our... And there's a scientific reason for this. It's just that our center of our galactic center, our place, our solar system, in relation to the galactic center of the Milky Way, is moving further and further and further away. And so we are less in touch with these electrical forces, magnetic forces, spiritual forces, waves, if you want to call it that are either raise consciousness or decrease consciousness. So in the Dark Ages, we are literally burning books, burning people, burning knowledge, right? Now, we're coming out of that, thank goodness, yes. Testament to that is the massive technological advancements that we've made in the last 100 years, obviously. But we still are not balanced enough to use that knowledge that we're gaining with a balanced viewpoint of spiritual recognition that we're all brothers and sisters on this planet, right? We're still riddled with greed and power hungry and the politics of it all. And it's going to take quite a while until that catches up. So the idea is that Golden Age, we're in tune, we're there. And that's when we would have been able to build these monuments such as the Great Pyramid.
Interesting, okay.
Or because we cannot build the Great Pyramid now today. Engineers will tell you that.
That blows my mind every time I hear it.
What about
that we could not build the Great Pyramid with today's technology?
No, we couldn't do it. I mean, some of these stones are 200 tons. You go into the king's chamber, and they're polished almost like glass, and you can't put a razor blade between them. They're butted up against each other. We can't do this. This is diorite. It's the hardest substance on the face of the planet. But the official story, just like the Shakespeare story, there's an official Shakespeare story that is rubbish, that is hiding a basic truth. There's an official Egyptological story that is complete rubbish, that's hiding the real truth beneath it. And here's Shakespeare telling us to look at that. So obviously, for me, that was the attraction. Oh, I've got to go see. Why is he harping on about that? Well, it's just that at a time, let's say in the highest ages, back 13,000 years from today backwards, it's quite possible that we built those pyramids ourselves. It's also very probable that we had extraterrestrial help, because there are all kinds of signs pointing to that. Now, how does this lock into our knowledge about the Shakespeare story, right? Jason, you know this side of things just as deeply, possibly deeper than I do, in terms of the backstory of John Dee. He's communing with angels, right? For a long, long period, right? Is it because the only words we had for them then was angels? What were they? I don't want to necessarily get lost in the weeds of his version of angels versus Edward Kelly's version of angels, and how he was caught up in that whole, Kelly being rather fraudulent and probably working for the wrong reasons and the dark side of his magic. But in any case, it's clear that some of them were absolutely genuine. Otherwise, I could not have solved the Shakespeare mystery through the Enochian tables if it was all rubbish. I mean, it wouldn't have worked. So those angels, Uriel, Gabriel, Raphael, and
Michael,
and Michael, thank you, were presumably the real thing. But at the same time, he's also very dodgily having communication with some very tricky entities. So here you've got the possibility that a lot of the information that was being brought to light then, and I'm talking now about Dee and Kelly, I don't know, I don't know that side of it. I never got interested in going into the so-called magick with a K that Aleister Crowley ended up following, and all of that side of things, because they're using a different version of the Enochian tables than you need to solve the Shakespeare thing. And just was always just so wonderful to me that Raphael comes to him on the side, and I have to do this in a Monty Python voice. It's probably not what Raphael sounded like, but he goes, here, I want you to change it. Going to shift these letters across here, and we'll call this a reform one. Eh? Stick it aside. Don't tell anybody. That's for the Shakespeare thing. Put this one out. That's all right. I mean,
to be fair, the reformed one is the one that's brought in broad use. So and that was that cycle was actually repeated with every single part of the furniture that was transmitted. At first there was a rough draft, and then there was the finished one. It was for every piece.
Okay, so everything that Aleister Crowley was doing was with the reformed table as well.
To the best of my knowledge, certainly that's in wide knowledge now. the reform table is but that said, I'm trying to remember, there was a whole thing with when it was originally printed by Casaubon, it was printed backwards because of a printer's error, and so people were using a backwards version of it. So there's a lot of messy signal around that one. Let's put it that way.
I didn't know that either, and isn't that interesting? Since all of the codes end up having to be read backwards in order for you to be able to decode them properly, right? MOAI does sway my life in 12th night. It has to be turned backwards. He says, if this fall into thy hand, revolve. You revolve it, becomes IAOM, which is the Freemasons' most secret password. It's a pranayam technique. Again, so that's on page 264 of the first folio, which has at the very top of it, it says, page 264, no man must know. No man must know. What follows? The numbers altered. No man must know. You look to the next page, and it's page 273. The numbers altered. It's as clear as day. He's telling us, and then it goes down into the whole scene of Malvolio being tricked by this letter that he gets, where he thinks that Olivia is in love with him, and she's left this secret letter, but it's really they're trying to trick him and make a fool out of him. And it says, MOAI doth sway my life, and he starts trying to solve it. So he's trying to solve a code in the play that is never solved in the play. It never resolves itself. It just hangs in midair. But it's for us. It's not for the play. It's for us to solve. And then he literally says, half a paragraph down, if this fall into thy hand, revolve. And he says it in italics to draw attention to it. So if you revolve MOAI, you get IAOM. And then you find out that IAOM is the most secret password of the Freemasons, where they are given the letters one at a time over the course of their apprenticeship. But they're not given I until the very end. And when they're given I at the end, then they're told you have to read it backwards, because it's a pranayam technique that is pronounced with these sounds. Om. I will leave it at that. I can't say anymore. It's very close to a pranayam technique that is known in certain circles. Right? So he's giving that away in 12th night by giving it backwards. So anyway, thank you for that information. I wasn't aware myself that it was the reform table that most of the magick people were using, because I just haven't gone there anyway. But the point is, it is genuine, it does work, and it does solve the Shakespeare mystery. So I literally went to Egypt because it was this connection to, he's telling us about ancient wisdom, he's telling us about mathematical constants that he should have no knowledge of, D's, and he's telling us to look at the Great Pyramid. And you look at the Great Pyramid, and the same things are there. And then the story of the Great Pyramid is that literally it could only really have been built during the Golden Ages, either 13,000 years ago, or even another entire Yuga cycle back from that, another 24,000 years back, which I personally think is when they were built, because there's a lot of geologic proof that the Sphinx is way, way, way older than it has been thought to be. But you see, the Egyptologists are stuck in their paradigm. They have to say the Great Pyramid was built by Khufu, Pharaoh Khufu, because if you go further back than that, which is 2,500 BC, we're dealing with cavemen. And how could cavemen build? Right? So they're stuck in linear evolution. They can't get out of that. Therefore, they're stuck with, it has to be 2,500 BC. Therefore, it cannot possibly be that it was built by anyone else. Khufu. Well, Khufu, we know his life cycle, and he would have lived about 20 years while it was being made. So they had to have built the pyramid in 20 years. And that means they had to quarry the stones from Aswan, 500 miles away, bring them across the desert on tree logs. Yeah, let's do it by tree logs. And then cut them here, and each one being the size of a Cadillac car and between 2 and 5 tons, and those are the smallest ones, lay one of those down every 2.5 minutes. for 20 years and make them perfectly aligned to the cardinal points. And not only that, it's not just a pile of 6.5 million stones. There are passageways and chambers inside, and that are all perfectly constructed to mathematical perfection. So the story is rubbish, but it can't be solved until they're willing to say, yeah, we're wrong about linear evolution. Oh, yeah, it could be done with cyclical evolution. The Greeks were right. The Vedas were right. So that's what John Dee is drawing our attention to. Look to the past.
What is your intuition about what the pyramids were? Because I know that I've seen them go in my lifetime, from people saying they were tombs to possibly initiation chambers. What is your take on what were they used? Were they just to store this information, or what do you think they were?
I can only speculate. I don't pretend to be an expert on this side of things at all. But we do know that not a single pharaoh or mummy has ever been found in any pyramid. That's all complete. Again, it's complete rubbish. Kids are being taught that in school, and it's not true. They are not tombs. The mummies were found in the Valley of the Kings. They found Tutankhamun's tomb, etc., etc. But that's not a pyramid. All the pyramids, none has ever housed a mummy. So the chambers inside them and the sarcophagi that are in some of them, and particularly the sarcophagus that is inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, you have to look deeper into what they must have had a function. I don't know enough about the science of that. Christopher Dunn has done a lot of really good work on the possibility that they were some form of energy device, which makes sense. But at the same time, there is the mystical side of the energy frequencies themselves, which if you're attuned to, you're a meditator, and I'm sure a lot of your audience are. If you can still your mind and with techniques and go into a meditative state, you're more attuned and more aware. I'm not saying it's any better. I'm not sort of, saying, oh, look at us, we're meditators. I'm just saying, if you can attune yourself, it's like literally attuning to a certain wavelength with a tuning fork, because you can do with the piano or whatever. It becomes, you hit a pure vibration. And so it's possible, of course, and some people are very, very, very psychically attuned to these deeper states of consciousness, and have reported feeling the effects of being in the king's chamber. I can say for myself that, yes, I mean, I don't at all think of myself as being particularly a psychic sensitive at all. But let me put it down to the practicality of it. I do understand math, and in my 4 visits there, I had the opportunity, I should say, to be in the King's Chamber alone for about an hour to meditate before they opened it up to the public and all the tourists. And I received the intuition then that if you can imagine it, if you can imagine like 2 pure cubes end to end, they're not pure. They are higher than they are wide. But if you think of it, just to get your sense of it, it's like being inside a cube. You can imagine equal sides, equal height. Double that is twice as long. And then it's a little bit higher as well. And the ratios are actually in pure integer ratios. They are 19 high. I'm not talking feet or meters or cubits. I'm talking the nearest integer ratio that they all line up. It's 19 by 17 by 34. And that particular mathematical combination gives you a 3-4-5 triangle diagonally across from opposite corner to opposite corner. Not the flat wall or not the base, but it's built, in other words, to hide a 3-4-5 triangle. If they built it to any other dimensions, that would not be there. So you know that sitting in there. That's not my discovery. That you can find that online easily. I go, okay, so I'm sitting here, and this is literally built to these ratios for a reason, 3-4-5. What's the only other thing that is in here? The sarcophagus that is sitting there. And it's like just a box, and its lid is gone, it's empty, and we know from measuring it that if you measure the overall volume of the box, it's a certain number, and if you measure the emptiness of the box, the actual hollowed out part, it's half of that. So it's deliberately half of itself. It's, let's say the volume is 2, the actual solid stone part is 1, and the air inside it is 1. It's all very particularly, specifically. Why is that? And then you enter the king's chamber through a corridor where you've got to crawl on your hands and knees to get there. And it's almost the same shape and size as shape as what would be needed to push this sarcophagus through, except that you can't. It's slightly higher than it would be if you left it vertically. But if you turn it on its side and put some KY jelly on it, I suppose, you could slide it through. It's almost precisely, there. So here's the story. The sarcophagus must hold Khufu in all his regalia. That's his tomb, and we'll lay him in there with all his stuff on him, his beads and his whatever, his food for the afterlife, etc. Put the lid on it, and then we're going to bring him up to there, and then we're going to have to turn him on his side to slide him in. Poor guy. He's going to go, right? And then we turn him back up. It's totally ludicrous. A gorilla sitting there with Legos could work this out. I mean, I've seen images of that on YouTube of gorillas working, right? Legos. I can put them together and figure out. So I was sitting there thinking of Legos, and I thought, the king's chamber is this size and dimensions for an absolute reason, to tell you this beautiful aspect of the basis of Pythagorean theory. 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. The building block, that's the whole basis of engineering. Right? So why is the sarcophagus there? And I just knew in meditation that if I turned it on its side and slid it against the wall, the end wall, it would fit, I thought, precisely 5 horizontally and precisely 6 vertically, which if it was the right way up, it would not work because it would be too high and not wide enough. That was my intuition. I went back to my hotel and worked out the math, and it was precise, absolutely precise. It's meant to fit 5, like Legos. Click, 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 6, 6, 6. So there would be 30 would be filling the wall. And then, obviously your next thought is, if that's set in stone, no pun intended, the length of the sarcophagus, how did they choose the length? Because, why is it a certain length? It could be anything. They could still stack them like that. I wonder how many of them fit precisely into the king's chamber. And I worked it out. And the undeniable thing is, it ends up being this number that is perhaps the most mysterious math constant of all time, called the fine structure constant, and it's 1/137. And if anybody wants to look that up, look up online, 1/137. What is that? Most mysterious constant. Richard Feynman talks about it. Wolfgang Pauli talks about it. Einstein talks about it. Everybody talks about it. It's just mysterious. It's a non-dimensional number. It would be the one number that we could send out into space, and if it was picked up by intelligent life, they would know that we had reached a stage of understanding what it is. The fine structure constant is 1/137, and it's the in simplest possible terms, it's the probability that an electron, i.e. physicality, right? Deep down, it's all electrons, that an electron will emit a photon of light. That in other words, it will turn back into its source. If you want to think of that as a spiritual metaphor, it's the probability that physicality can return back to source, back to spirit, which is a beautiful way of thinking of it. But it's an actual number, and if it was not exactly that number, 1/137, we could not exist. Life in the universe could not exist. So all of this is known, and I solved it with the sarcophagus, and I realized, well, holy shit! You've got to. Why did they build that to tell us the fine structure constant? How did they know it? Now, boys and girls, if you've got your iPhones ready with a calculator on it, put into your phone, into your calculator, 1/137, and see what it comes out as. Have you done it? what does it say? It says 0.007. And a few other numbers. In fact, it says 007299270072992700729 out to infinity. It's 007 forwards and backwards, 7007 forwards and backwards, but literally brought down to 3 basic decimal places. It's John Dee's code number. Ta-da! And he's telling us to look at that. There are more things in heaven and earth, a ratio than are dreamed of in your philosophy. That's what fascinates me about it. That's what took me to Egypt. That's why it's like, oh my God, he's telling us about ancient knowledge that we do not know today. And he's saying, wake up, because this is deep stuff.
You mentioned that you were also extending towards the King James Bible and finding even more stuff there, which I'm very curious about.
Yeah. You want to leave that hanging there like that? I was hoping for a tiny bit of a pause and then.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to steal your dramatic pause. I thought you were that was your.
No, just get this.
Go ahead.
No, that is the denouement. But what did I tell you? The actual ratios of the King's Chamber are 19 by 17 by 34, and then what's called the false door at the west side of every chamber, wherein there's the idea that a deceased would pass through into the duat, which is interestingly not the case. But there are several in the later in the Valley of the King's chambers. There are certain rooms, shall we say, that have what's called a false door. And they measure the 2 sides and the top. They don't measure the bottom. So if you take 2 sides of 19 and the top of 17, that gives you 55. So basically you've got a King's Chamber that is done by 17, by 19, by 34, by 55. What are the grids that you have to put the gravestone and the sonnet's dedication and the monument into to solve the Shakespeare mystery? You put the grave into 17, you put the sonnet's dedication into 19, you put the monument into 34 and a 55. They each give you hidden triple towers symbolism with the word De Vere as an inverted tau cross balanced against them. I was mystified by that as to why they chose 17 and 19 and 55 for years and years and years. I thought, well, I don't know. He just chose those. I put them into various grids until I found the triple tower and the inverted De Vere, right? And then I found out, the King's Chamber is those numbers. Okay, now we can move on.
Okay. So it's a lot to digest.
Yeah. So the big question that has hung in the air for, how long? A long time, people have been wondering, why would King James ascends to the throne, right, 1603, when Elizabeth passes, and he obviously wants to make his mark, and his legacy is going to be this King James Bible, right? I mean, that's his big deal. That's his big hit movie. And so he orders it done in 1604, and it finally gets done. It's published in 1611. And people have thought for a long time, there's one thing they spot, and it's in Psalm 46. The 46th word from the beginning is shake, and the 46th word from the end is spear. In Psalm 46. So people have sort of riffed on that and thought, well, that's kind of, that must be a code to say Shakespeare has something to do with the translation of the King James Bible. And why not? I mean, why would the king not call on the greatest writer right there in his own backyard? I mean, he's there. The official story is he had it done by 54 clerics, a whole mishmash of you from this church and you from that church and you from this and this archbishop here and this vicar here, and then none of them are writers, and they'll all get together and they'll cobble this thing together and argue over who should do what and which part, and it ends up being not sounding like that at all. The beauty of it, the King James Bible is obviously the biggest selling Bible of all time, over 2.5 billion copies of that, but of the King James in print. 2.5 billion. And its popularity is partly due to the fact that it reads like it's one cohesive poetic voice.
Yeah, and it's the only thing that I can think of that sounds like Shakespeare or is comparable to Shakespeare in literary quality. And every other version of the Bible that's been done since, even with the most modern scholarship and things like that, is nowhere near as I wouldn't say good. It's the King James Bible actually has spiritual potency behind it if you read it out loud, and the other ones are like, listening to cable television or something like that.
That's the point I'm making, is that it is that popular because of the unheard, the unseen. It's just there. It's like reading any saint's words, isn't it? You pick up Yogananda's books and open it anywhere, and it speaks to you. And every paragraph is deeply meaningful. And yes, it's the same with the King James Bible, and it's the same with Shakespeare's works. And so it made sense that he must have had something to do with it, just for the pure convenience of him being there. But it's not the official story. So I would yes, it's easier to, it's easier to understand this if you go to episode 5 on the Gaia series, because it's easier to follow with a lot of graphics. But I will describe it and then urge you to just go see it, because it's something I'm very, very proud of, because it really is a slam dunk comprehension that makes it virtually impossible that Shakespeare was not the person behind this. So that one little clue, the Psalm 46 and the 46th word from the beginning, 46th word from the end, is just a little, breadcrumb in the forest. But when you go much, much, much deeper, let's look at the way that it's easiest to describe is that in all the works of Shakespeare, we've got 1593, we first hear of him in a publication called Venus and Adonis. That's the first time we ever see the name William Shakespeare in print, and it's dedicated to Henry Wriothesley. Next comes the sonnets in 1609. Next and last comes the first folio that's published in 1623, which is all his plays. Perhaps not all, 36 of his plays. He probably wrote 2 or 3 others. So that's the main bulk of his work, is the poems. He wrote 6 epic-length poems, of which Venus and Adonis was the first. He wrote 154 sonnets, called just Shakespeare sonnets, and that's in 1609. Now, somewhere in the middle between 1609 and 1623, in 1611, King James Bible comes out. So I show that he's using a specific system that can be replicated so that you can understand the validity of the codes. And I've called it the Alpha Omega system, because it boils down to this. He will give a clue always at the very beginning, that is the very first page of a piece of work. He will give a mirror image clue at the very last page of that work, and he'll give a clue in the very center of that work. His system, which is replicatable as a way of proving the validity of everything he's doing, is always a clue on the very first page, a clue in the very last page, and a clue in the very, very center. So I'll try to make this as comprehensible as possible without the pictures, but go to the Gaia episode 5 and see it with all the graphics, which is easier to follow. But basically, start with a quick recap of what we already know in the sonnets. The first page of the sonnet hides the geometry that reveals the precise knowledge of the then unknown math constants. The mathematical relationship between the world's 3 major measurement systems is he has the foot, the cubit, meter embedded in the sonnets, as well as everything else. So that's on the first page. The very last page of the sonnets reveals. It's there's a poem tacked on at the end called A Lover's Complaint. And the last two lines of A Lover's Complaint, when put into an anagram, and it's just simply the very last line, and then the word finis to say it's finished. And it's a perfect anagram of, finis is Latin for the end, of course. The anagram is in fine, that's another way of saying finished, in the end, in Latin. In fine, it says, print conceals, I am Edward de Vere. It's a perfect anagram. The very last sonnet itself, this by that I prove, love's fire heats water, water cools not love. You put that with finis into an anagram, and it says, Alterstone finally solves WW, that's his signature that he puts together for the two William Shakespeares, E. Vere. It's crystal clear. So that's the very beginning and the very end. Now, I'm going to skip forward here to just the center of it. When you go to the center of the sonnets, the very center is the page 40. There's 80 pages in the sonnet. So the very center is 40 pages and then 40 pages on the right, which is Edward de Vere's code number. De Vere's code number was 40. And there's something called a catchword that the printers used in those days, so that they knew how to collate the pages together properly. So if the next word on the next page was whatever, fish, they'd put the word fish down at the bottom of the previous page as an added thing, not as part of the sonnet, not as part of the text, but it would have to say that so that the printers would go, oh, that's what hooks up to that. Yes. And all of them have that. It's called the catchword. So the catchword at the bottom of the middle of the sonnets is I was. And at the top of the next page, I was. And so that is the name of God in past tense. I was what I was. The name of God that he uses throughout the codes is I am, that I am. That's central to all the codes. And in the very center, same place of the folio, then he has Latin word for I will be what I will be. So he's put the name of God at the very center of the sonnets, the very center page of the first folio. Now, if you look at the beginning of the first folio and the very end of the first folio, you've got that picture that we've all seen of this ludicrous guy with a head that's way too big and a jacket that is half of a front and half of a back, and he's got two right eyes. The whole thing is a coded structure. But he's got three lines going down this jacket because it's half of the front and half of the back. And the lines are going straight down, and a curve like a letter C. So there's an I and a C. And in pure, simple gematria, where I is the ninth letter and C is the third letter, the jacket itself is saying 993. Now, if you go to the very last page of the first folio, you find it's page 993. It shouldn't be, though. The previous page, again, the number's altered. The wrong page before it is 398. It goes from 398 to 993. Obviously, it should be 399. So it should go from 398 to 399, but it's 993. It's pure mirror imaging what's on the very first page of the folio and very last page of the folio. And you go to the middle, and it's the name of God. I will be what I will be, matching I was what I was in the science, and I am that I am. The absolute center, then, if you go to the Venus and Adonis, the very first thing that was ever published, the absolute center of it, the entire structure, there are, each verse in it is 6 lines. And so you place them all of the verses, and the absolute center verse is verse 100. And there are 594 lines to the left of it and 594 lines to the right of it, which makes no sense right now. But when you look back at the first folio where I said it went from 398 to 993 instead of 399, the jump from 399 to 993 is 594. So he's jumped by 594 at the very end of the folio. And in Venus and Adonis, he's got 594 lines and 594 lines balanced against a middle 100th verse. Then you go back to the sonnets and you say, I wonder if he's done 594 in the sonnets. You count the number of the sonnets that have the word verse in them. Verse, because he's talking lines, verses, chapters, and numbers. So numbers in the folio, 594, 594. Venus and Adonis, 594 lines, 594 lines. In the sonnets, the number of sonnets that contain the word verse is split right down the middle, and they add up, adding up the numbers of the sonnets that contain the word verse. You've got 594 on the left and 594 on the right. So then you go, okay, what on earth is going on here? Let's go to the King James Bible. The absolute center of the King James Bible is Psalm 117. It's the shortest verse in the entire Bible, just 2 verses. The shortest, technically it's the first shortest chapter in the entire Bible, and it's just 2 verses. To the left of that absolute center of the Bible, 594 chapters. To the right of the absolute center of the Bible, 594 chapters. So he's done what is already there. That's cast in stone. That's the way the Hebrew version and the modern version were put together. And there's 594 and 594, and the center is the shortest chapter in the whole Bible. And he's done the same thing in the first folio, and he's done the same thing in the sonnets, and he's done the same thing in Venus and Adonis, the first thing that he ever published. And it goes on and on and on, but that's a brief overcap of it. It's literally, it's undeniable that he wrote Venus and Adonis in 1593, 18 years before King James Bible comes out, and yet it was patterned on what the King James Bible would be. The first folio then is echoing it 12 years after, in 1623, after 1611. And the sonnets was echoing it 2 years before. I mean, it's a slam dunk. There are many, many other aspects to it, and it's easy. I've skipped over a bunch because it really requires the pictures. But
well, definitely
something like that. Sorry, what?
Oh, well, all the more reason for people to watch the show.
Yes, please do. So just go to and remember, you can get a link. I mean, don't just go looking up Gaia. If you go to my website, there's a button there. Just click on that to see the Gaia show. You'll be able to watch it for free for 7 days free, and watch Jason's stuff and watch a whole bunch of other stuff as well, because there's a ton of really, really good stuff on there. It's very interesting, isn't it?
Why don't you give people your website one more time?
Yeah, to be or not to be. To be or not to be.org. And that's it.
All right. Any new big trips planned or anything else out on the horizon?
Yeah, I'm going to England. I'm going to Stratford for the first time in years and years. I'm revisiting it in about a month and a half's time, because I've got some other clues that I want to look at.
I see. Well,
I want to see actually physically.
I guess we shouldn't give it away then. This would all make an excellent movie at some point, I think, particularly a heist movie.
Yeah, well, hopefully we get the musical movie done, which is being written with David Seidler, as I said. But yeah.
All right.
I'd like to see a heist movie. That would be cool.
Is your show's on Gaia now already? Like, do they put the whole thing up already? Okay.
Yeah, the whole thing is up. All 7 episodes are there. You can binge watch them if you want.
Excellent. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you for being on again. This is a great conversation, and thank you for sharing all of that. That's a lot to digest, but there's some serious information in there. So, and I'm sure everything else will be revealed in the show.
Yeah, check it out. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you.
All the best.
All right, that brings us to the end of our enlightening conversation with Alan Green. A huge thank you to Alan for sharing his profound insights, and to you, our listeners, for tuning in. Before we sign off, don't forget to check out the Magick of Tarot course at magick.me. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned practitioner, this course promises to enrich your practice and ignite your spiritual evolution. Visit tarot.magick.me to start your journey today. That's tarot.magick.me, tarot.magick.me. Okay, I will see you in class. Thank you for joining us, and lots of love. See you soon.